Since I have time during this lovely quarantine, I did some research and figured that I have two more archetypes I have not reviewed and that have appeared in the anime. One of which will be reviewed right now, as you can see, and the other one probably tomorrow, maybe, sometime. I have time. Time is of the essence. Anyway, this is actually one of my favorite archetypes aesthetically. It was before, but now I like it even more, and I'll get to why pretty soon. And those are Charmers, and yeah, you might be asking yourself, well, how did they appear in the anime exactly? Well, the three of their cards have appeared during the GX era, two of which were used by this kid known as Pseudo, I think his name was. Tsutomo, yeah, that's right, that's his name. A very brief character who I believe the majority of you do not know that he even exists, since he is a Season 4 exclusive character. He was basically being bullied and picked on for what a terrible duelist he is, and then he got swallowed by darkness. Lovely. Anyway, he was using two cards, and the third card of this archetype was used by a random obelisk student, so yeah, this card is 49 cards long, but the review won't be very long because the archetype is actually pretty concise. What does that mean is that most of the cards actually have a lot of effects that they share, or they just have the exact same effect but for its appropriate attribute. So yeah, let's start with the vanilla Charmers first. The first of that being ERIA, HITA, AUSA, WYNN, Lina, and DHARC. All of these share a common effect, which is actually a flip effect, as a matter of fact. And said flip effect is that they are allowed to snatch one monster of their appropriate attribute to your side of the field as long as they remain face up on the field. And yeah, this was a perfectly serviceable effect for back in the day, but it was a pain in the ass to pull off, so you most likely had to rely on specific metas where certain attributes are dominant. So yeah, what else is there to say? Well, ERIA is the most kawaii of the bunch, while HITA is the most prominent waifu as always, and yeah, I really like all of their aesthetics. Too much to really care about that. I like them all a lot, so yeah. Now, next up we have their familiars, which honestly there isn't much to say about them. We have Gigobite, Archfiend Marmot of Nefariousness, Petite Dragon, Happy Lover, Metabet, and the only one that actually matters in this discussion, Hita's familiar, because red is always the best color for a waifu and, well, basically everything. Foxfire, her familiar, is the only one which has an effect, and that is that during the end phase, if this card was destroyed by battle and sent to the graveyard this turn and was face up at the start of the damage step, special summon this card from the graveyard, and this face up card cannot be tributed for a tribute summon. As it will be noted later on, all of these familiars actually received retrains later on, so yeah, there's absolutely no reason to run any of these. But before we get to those retrains and the retrains of the Charmers in general, one of said familiars actually has an archetype of its own, and that's Gigobite. First of that lineup is Gagagigo, which is a level 4 reptile with very tolerable attack stats for the time of its release, and then its evolution Gigagagigo, which is, I don't know, and then the prime mouthful, that is the Go Giga Gaga Gigo, because why not? Yeah, all of them are vanillas, and I guess that was considered acceptable. And the last of the bunch is Gagagigo the Risen, which is a rank 4 Xyz monster. It requires 3 level 4 monsters that has no effects, but I gotta give this thing credit because this is the rank 4 Xyz monster with the highest attack stats in the game to this day. I say that because he was released ages and ages ago and is actually one of the two rank 4 Xyz monsters with no effects, so yeah, at least he's good for something at least. Anyway, now we move on to the retrains of the Charmers themselves. The familiar possessed lineup. the familiar possessed area, Hita, Ausa, WYNN, Lina, and DHARC. All of them have the effect that you contribute area the water charmer, well, their appropriate charmers I should say, and a monster of the appropriate attribute alongside them. In order to special summon them, they have the same stats as Gagagigo. And yeah, if you summon them this way, they gain the ability to inflict piercing damage, which is because we are in the Stone Age equivalent of Yu-Gi-Oh, and this was considered passable back in the day. But yeah, you basically you run them because they're better than the originals, because they have way more attack points than the originals. So yeah. Okay, so now for their familiars. Not all of them received retrains, but the basic fire, water, earth, and wind received retrains. We start off with Hitas, that being INARI fire. And yeah, you can only control one of them. This is shared among all of the familiars, this effect. And it's the effect they also share is that if you control a spellcaster type monster, you can special summon them from the hand. And now this is where their individual effects come in. INARI Fire can once per turn during your next standby phase, after this face-up card on the field was destroyed by a card effect and sent to the graveyard, special summon itself from the graveyard. Nefarious Archfiend, Eater of Nefariousness, god damn it, I love that name, can once per turn during your opponent's end phase, if this card is in your graveyard, can target one face-up monster you control, destroy it, and if you do, it can special summon it from itself from the graveyard. Gigabyte can, when it's destroyed by battle or a card effect and sent to the graveyard, special summon one monster with 1500 attack and 200 defense from your deck, except Gigabyte, which includes all of the familiars and some very slim variety of monsters, which I won't even get into because it's so utterly pointless that it does not even matter. And Ranryu, the wind retrain, which actually was released just recently in Rising Rampage. When it's destroyed by battle or card effect and sent to the graveyard, it can basically do the same thing as Gigabyte, but only from the graveyard. So yeah, you basically run these because they're free monsters at their finest. They have some niche, decentish little effects if you if they somehow remain on the field for whatever you need for your stun plays or extra deck toolboxes, if you for some reason need to keep them on the field for anything else. So yeah, basically they're free special summonable monsters. It's only a bit dampened by the fact that you can only control one of each. So yeah, it's as simple as it gets, and you should always run a decent amount of these. Yeah, basically Charmers are basically a deck which you most likely focus only on one or two attributes, but if you focus on all four, then you have to take in consideration an optimal deck building in order to cover all of your bases. Alright, and now we get to the so-called Cataclysmic Charmers, which are, how should I put, alternative versions of the retrains, but anyway, yeah, only the basic four, Ausa, Hita, ERIA, and WYNN, received their own Cataclysmics, and their effects are that once per turn you contribute one monster of the appropriate attribute, except this card, to special summon a monster of the appropriate attribute from your hand, and the monster special summoned by this effect is destroyed, and if the monster that summoned it is removed from your side of the field. So yeah, also pretty self-explanatory shared effects. And yeah, I don't like the Cataclysmics that much because how should I put, I don't really feel that much use coming from them, unlike, well, their use is certainly more out there, as it can basically boost any attribute specific archetype, especially a spellcaster focused archetypes. So we have that, but in terms of how the archetype is generally played, not to mention they have very terrible stats, they're just barely above the original Charmers. So yeah, familiar possessed ones are still your be-all end-all main deck monsters right next to their familiar retrains. So yeah, I'd say run by preference. Preference. So yeah. Next up we have the Cataclysmic Familiars, as they were. First up we have Cataclysmic Crusted CALCIFIDA. There we go. Anyway, they all share a summoning condition, which is if a face-up monster of the appropriate attribute you control is destroyed by battle or by an opponent's card effect, you can special summon this card from your hand. Then, this is where their individual effects come in. The Earth Familiar allows you to send one monster from your deck to the graveyard, basically becoming a foolish burial, and you can only use this effect once per turn. Then we have Cataclysmic Scorching Sunburner, which allows you to inflict damage to your opponent equal to half the attack of one of those destroyed fire monsters in your graveyard, and you can also use this effect once per turn. CRYONIC COLDO allows you to place one spell or trap card from the field on the top of the deck. And then we have the water one. Yeah, all four basic ones only got the Cataclysmic Familiars. Another mouthful, Cataclysmic Crisp CHILLBRAIN. Yeah, I saw another alternative to the name, which was a very hard mouthful. Basically, she allows you to send one random card from your opponent's hand to the graveyard, which honestly is a pretty sick effect, and I would actually advise running this. So yeah, all of these are level 8s with okay-ish stats, I would say the least. Cataclysmic Scorching Sunburner is basically ran in most fire builds because of his 200 defense mark, which is the prime fire type gimmick. But yeah, all of these, like I said, are basically they have nice summoning conditions, and their own unique effects are basically used for whichever game state you might need at the point. So yeah. And to cap off the main deck, we have the medium lineup, which honestly only now consists of only one card, which is WYNN. The WYNN medium. Anyway, it's a level 5 with stats of the familiar possessed lineup, and this card is always treated as a charmer card, and you can discard this card and one WYNN monster, add one WYNN monster with 1500 attack or less defense from your deck to your hand, except the WYNN medium. Also, you cannot activate monster effects for the rest of this turn except WYNN monsters. When your WYNN monster is destroyed by battle while this card is in your hand, you can special summon this card, and you can only use each effect of the WYNN medium once per turn. If this card was one level lower, I would call it a much better card. But as it is right now, I mean, Wind Witches can actually get some pretty decent mileage out of this. But as it is now, I would not put it into a basic Charmer deck, because the other mediums are not a thing yet. I don't know if there'll ever be a thing. They probably will at some point, but as of now, it's not that useful in the grand scheme of things outside of Wind Witches. So yeah, now on to their extra deck, which only consists of 4 Link monsters now that we've gone out of the way with Giga the Risen. We have the first one that was released, Hita the Fire Charmer Ablaze. It's a Link 2 with 1850 attack, and it requires 2 monsters, including a fire monster. Yeah, all of them have the effect of requiring at least one monster of their specific attributes. So yeah, let's cover all of them at once. Hita the Fire Charmer Ablaze, Wind the Wind Charmer Verdant, Ausa the Earth Charmer Immovable, and ERIA the Water Charmer Clear. So yeah, this card is always treated as a familiar possessed card, and basically you can target one monster of the appropriate attribute in your opponent's graveyard, special summon it to a zone this card points to, and if this Link summon card is destroyed by battle or is destroyed by an opponent's card effect while it's in its owner's monster zone, you can add a monster of the appropriate attribute with 1500 or less defense from your deck to your hand, and you can only use each effect once per turn. As far as extra deck extending goes, this is actually a fantastic Link 2 monster to play. Why? Because, well, ERIA and WYNN aren't that much of a big deal because yeah, I'll get to that soon, because you can actually revive nightmare monsters with these things if you manage to get rid of them. So yeah, Ausa and Hita are the most prominent ones because of Nightmare Phoenix, and Cerberus are basically the most played nightmare monsters in basically any deck. And Verdant and Clear would be better if their nightmares were still legal. The water representative in form of Nightmare Mermaid, and the wind representative in form of Nightmare Goblins. So yeah. But as far as them go, without relying on Nightmare specifically, they're pretty nice cards, and also allow you to go plus when they get popped, if they ever do get popped, because you're probably going to be using them for extending into higher link monsters. So yeah, that's pretty much it for when it comes to the monster lineup. And now let's go on to their spell and trap lineup. We start off with the recently released Grand Spiritual Art ICHIRIN, which is their field spell. Once per turn, if you control a spellcaster monster with 1500 defense, the first time your opponent's monster activates an activated effect, it is negated. You can reveal one spellcaster monster in your hand, add one monster with 1500 attack and 200 defense that has the same attribute as that monster from your deck to your hand, then shuffle the revealed card into the deck. You can only use this effect of Grand Spiritual Archetype once per turn. Nice card, but I have one major problem with it, and that is actually the negation effect, if you can believe it. The negation is actually mandatory, meaning the opponent can bait it out, kind of like with the Magician's Hands. So yeah, if he baits it out with something you did not want this thing to negate, well, then he's tough shit, and unless you can somehow manage to replace this field spell with another one from your deck. I don't know how. I guess you can pop it with something like MST and then replace it with something with, I don't know, Demise of the Land or something like that. But that's such a specific maneuver that it's borderline pointless. And also the search effects are also pretty nice. It's the only archetypal field spell the archetype has, so I guess it couldn't hurt. Well, it is a very powerful field spell to use, although Secret Village of the Spellcasters is, in my opinion, a much better option. Next up, we have their final spell card, which is the continuous spell Awakening of the Possessed. Monsters you control gain 300 attack for each different attribute you control. Charmer and familiar possessed monsters you control cannot be destroyed by card effects. If a spellcaster monsters with 1850 original attack is normal or special summoned to your field, draw one card. You can only use this effect of Awakening of the Possessed once per turn. Always run 3. I'm not gonna stretch it any more than it needs to be, honestly. This is the primary playmaker this card has. I would have loved it if this was the field spell of the archetype. So yeah, run 3 and never any less. It's a bummer that it isn't searchable, but due to how good it is. Alright, now on to the trap cards. First up, we have Unpossessed, a continuous trap. Charmer monsters you control cannot be destroyed by battle. If a familiar possessed monster you control attacks an opponent's monster, it gains 800 attack during damage calculation only. If a monster you control is destroyed by a battle or card effect, you can special summon one spellcaster type monster with 1500 defense from your deck, whose attribute is different from at least one of those destroyed monsters' original attributes on the field. In attack position or face down defense position, you can only use this effect, the effects of Unpossessed once per turn. Also run 3 because it's a stupid free resource generator that basically goes off if your board gets wiped or your monsters get destroyed by battle. So yeah, it also works on familiars, I think. So yeah, it actually works on familiars, which is pretty dang nice. So you can also chain off of their own effects, which they can provide you with. So yeah, great card. Never go outside without it. Okay, now for an oddball, Memory of an Adversary actually falls into the Gagagigo archetype, believe it or not. I don't know how either. But anyway, its effect is that when an opponent's monster declares an attack, you take damage equal to the attacking monster's attack, and if you do, banish that monster during the end phase of your opponent's next turn. Special summon that monster to your side of the field. I guess you can run this if you really feel like it, but if you feel more meta relevant and more intelligent, then I would actually present you with a much better card, that being the Dimension Prison, because it's a better card. First of all, it completely blocks any damage, and not to mention that, I mean, you get to have the monster in the end, but is it really worth it taking a whole ton of damage just to get the monster yourself later on? I think no. Alright, now for the final batch of cards which are connected to the archetype, and those are the spiritual arts of each attribute. That being the spiritual water art Aoi, spiritual fire art Kurenai, spiritual earth art Kurogane, spiritual wind art Miyabi, and spiritual light art Hijiri, and dark spirit art Greed. All of them requires tributing a monster of their appropriate type in order to activate their effects. Aoi allows you to look at your opponent's hand and send one card from their hand to the graveyard. Kurenai allows you to inflict damage to your opponent equal to the tributed monster's attack. Kurogane allows you to special summon one level 4 or lower earth monster from your graveyard except the tributed monster. Miyabi allows you to target one card your opponent controls and place that target on the bottom of the deck. Hijiri allows you to target one banished monster your opponent target one banished monster, your opponent can reveal one trap card from their hand to negate this card's effect, otherwise you special summon the monster. And Dark Spirit Art Greed allows you to draw 2 cards, but your opponent is allowed to show one spell card in his hand in order to negate this effect. I have no idea. Yeah, I know the Dark Spirit Art Greed and Spiritual Light Art Hijiri were released way later than the original 4, but what's with the negation effects? I mean, it is admirable that they have it. Dark Spirit Art Greed is basically a straight +2, so yes, please, since the opponent is basically going to be emptying out their hands of spell cards unless they have some stuff like Iron Core of Kwakimeru, God forbid, in order to stop said effect. And Hijiri, again, trap cards from the hand ain't happening all that much. I mean, the trap cards from that are going to be in the hand at that time are probably going to be something like infinite impermanence that can be straight up activated from the hand rather than kept in the hand in order to negate this thing's effects. So yeah, and that does it for Charmers. So yeah, this is a very tricky grading scale, because this is basically an archetype that's designed to function on its own while also being a support for attribute-specific decks. So here's the first. Everything gets a 2 out of 3 here. Yeah, a perfectly self-centered average score. Yeah, it's really a first one for me. Me too. But honestly, I would love to see this archetype brought back to relevance and be meta relevant. I really adore the aesthetic of this archetype, like a wizard having its own like familiar with that he can command and try to maybe evolve into other bigger familiars or demons. And now, which I've mentioned, now for the fact that I've mentioned earlier in the video, now that I have the Persona 5 under my belt, I adore this even more. So yeah, hashtag justice for elemental charmers. Really, I would really love to see more of this in the future. So yeah, until then, I'll see you guys next time with a rather big archetype, which I actually forgot to include. So yeah, this was my 160th archetype analysis, and the archetype analysis 161 is going to be a big one, and it also has some sort of significance in my Yu-Gi-Oh career, so I'll let you know what it is. Until then, stay healthy, stay at home, wash your hands, wipe your asses, and all that jazz. We don't want the COVID-19 spreading even more. Anyway, thank you all so much for watching. Stay tuned for more videos and updates. Comment, like, and subscribe. And as usual, I'll upload the next vid whenever I can. See you all. Have a good day and peace.